Now, this came as a response to Iran's continued threats, sieges of vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. As you can see with us, Vice Admiral Duncan Potts served as UK Navy warfare officer from 1979, interesting date to start, to 2018. He's former Assistant Chief of Naval Staff, Controller of the Navy and Director General of the Defence Academy in the UK. He has led piracy operations off the coast of Somalia, operated extensively in the theatre in the news every day this week, the Arabian Sea, the Persian Gulf. He's now Consultant and Director of Universal Defence and Security Solutions, advising on maritime strategy. Welcome to France 24, Vice Admiral. Thank you for waiting. We want to hear what was going on in Pakistan for the last few moments. Take us to the theatre, Vice Admiral. Give us your overview of, as you read it, US allied military capabilities that are operating at the moment. Who's where and what's in the waters right now?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And you're absolutely right. In 1979, during the revolution, little did I know that all these years later we'd still be talking about it. I think, in a nutshell, where we are was an inevitability from the day this started. In fact, I think I was talking to another broadcaster and said this would happen. If there was anything surprising, was that it took some time. And it's important to understand why. And the real reason was, during the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, shipping was used as a leverage there. Very much US Fifth Fleet destroyed the Iranian Navy of the time. And the Revolutionary Guard Corps and Iran learned the lesson that they needed to go asymmetric at sea against the US Navy. Going conventional force on force was always going to be a disaster for them. And they have remembered the lessons, and they have been practicing that and threatening it ever since. And that has very much dominated my career. So the IRGC operates a lot of small boats, similar to the ones that you can see on the screen alongside that I'm looking at there. And of course, the Strait of Hormuz is a very congested piece of water. It's a difficult piece of water. It's full of not just tankers and things like that, but a lot of trading dhows. There's a lot of cross-strait traffic going between Iran and the Emirates and Oman, and it's very busy. So the bottom line is the warning and reaction time of the Revolutionary Guard Corps coming off the beach and getting out is measured in minutes. They've had a series of coastal defense cruise missile sites along there, and of course drones now. So they have known the leverage that they've had over the Straits of Hormuz for 40 years, and it's a core part of their playbook.
Well, there's two areas you've taken us into. First of all, we've got US Iranian capabilities, and let's start with Iranian capabilities. You just talked about, the Iranian Navy losing significant capabilities since the US, I think, reported to eliminated something like roughly half of its forces, as you pointed to, late 80s. It's Operation Praying Mantis. Is it right to say that you talked about the asymmetric warfare starting here? So essentially, it was the birth of guerrilla-style Navy tactics emerging from that. And as we talked about those pictures, President Trump calls them wise guy boats, these small boats that we're now seeing in the water. We think, there's roughly 1,000, 2,000 of them operating?
Yeah, they are. And many of them are commercially available as well. And, very simple weapons can be very effective against unescorted ships. And we've seen ships boarded and taken in the last couple of days. There's nothing new here. I think it was back in 2019 that the UK flagship Stena Impero was taken and held hostage for some time. So the bottom line, it's a very difficult task to deal with because they can disperse along the coast. Big Navy ships need a well-found port. They're very obvious at sea, especially trying to hide against the intelligence sources that the US Navy has. But lots of small boats coming off the beach, hiding, being able to be taken out of the water, can provide a threat. So it's not insurmountable, but it's very asset intensive because you've got to match the warning and reaction time to the threat that exists.
Am I right to say, for those listening to you and trying to understand the Strait of Hormuz, if they haven't been there or around that area, to compare it perhaps to the channel between France and the UK, there are kind of reasonable comparisons, not like for like, but there are some takeaways in terms of the distance between the two and the kind of narrow strait of it. And I'm interested on the depth of
No,
what you can get in there. How deep is it?
yeah. Well, in the middle, it's deep. It's much more rocky than that. But in terms, I mean, it's a very good analogy. It's about at its narrowest point between Iran and Coin Island, which is owned by Oman. It's very similar to Dover to Calais. It's very similar that there is an international traffic separation scheme in the middle, exactly the same as there is in the English Channel. And that's a reflection of the fact that, the great global common of the high seas and internationally recognized straits are open to all. So some of the rhetoric that is being used, certainly you were talking about piracy and banditry and everything else. I mean, the US has said there's a blockade on Iran, and that has legal ramifications. It is a belligerent act. It's a recognized tool of war, and it comes with obligations and everything else. But equally, the Straits of Hormuz is an international strait, has been for, I think, actually a couple of hundred years, but enshrined within the UN conventions, the laws of the sea. And everyone has a right of free passage through there. So the illegality of what Iran is doing at the moment is manifest. And my view is that the sea game nations around the world must resist it, because international maritime law is largely set by practice, precedent, customary law, and of course now more enshrined law through Geneva Conventions and the UN Conventions of the Law of the Sea. And if we allow that to be changed, it will be used elsewhere around the world to disrupt shipping, whether that's in the South China Sea, the High North as it meets, let alone Bab el-Mandeb, and many other choke points around the world.
And when we try to envisage, Vice Admiral, what's going on, so we either view these images, the dramatic boarding of the Iranian forces seizing these two vessels early this week, or the image of the Americans blowing a hole in the center of one of the Iranian aligned vessels. And then we see kind of the serene seas in between, don't they? Just to try and work out, is this truce fairly tranquil in the meantime? Now, I would imagine you've talked about it since the 80s. You would have probably war game scenarios playing out in the Arabian Sea, not too dissimilar to what we have now. And if you have, to give us an idea of scenarios that could play out. And I'm told often by Navy staff that things could happen hard and fast when they change.
Yeah, very hard and very fast, and the Iranians know that. I mean, the geography plays towards them, because to get out to the traffic separation scheme is only about 15 miles, and if you're in a fast craft doing 40 knots, we can all do the maths and say it's a matter of minutes, and you can choose the time and place to go and do that. So any response to it, if merchant ships are going through there, needs to adopt a posture which is a 24/7 surveillance, but also a capability that can respond to it as well. So it's inevitably very asset intensive. I also sense one thing that's changed since the tanker war, and looking back to the 80s, that the international maritime community did continue trading through there, and many tankers were attacked. But these days, and quite understandably, there's a real focus on the welfare and safety of seafarers, and we're not yet at a point where the international trading community is prepared to take that risk, and certainly not without the force protection being provided. And then lob in there things like mines, which Iran has claimed it's laid there at the moment. I mean, those need to be verified, but the mere claim of them is enough to deter people transiting through those waters. So, yeah, it's a difficult task, but with the right resource and the right determination, it should be soluble. But we don't seem to be at that point yet.
Can we talk about those at the top of the shop for a minute, the decision makers and the emphasis, the pressure on European allies, the pressure on Britain? Let's just first have a listen to the US Defence Secretary yesterday, making clear his thoughts about European allies. This is what Pete Hegseth had to say.
We are not counting on Europe, but they need the Strait of Hormuz much more than we do, and might want to start doing less talking and having less fancy conferences in Europe and get in a boat.
And get in a boat. There are obviously political differences here. One is about the US decision to go it alone in the first place and then decide to alert its allies later, to then look at the situation legally and decide what sits within international law. Can we talk about British capabilities? I've reported for many years. I remember reporting 15 years ago with the BBC about the reduction, the complaints from Navy staff of the last 30 years, the ability to operate at sea. And I hear about the case that, some Navy staff, and I want to get your thought on this. If they were to try and look at operations of, let's say things do heat up and there needs to be kind of a security of the Strait or perhaps post-war scenario, that the Navy could either protect the RAF base in Cyprus at Akrotiri, but it couldn't do that at the same time as being used to keep the Strait of Hormuz safe. Is there any truth in that?
Well, at the end of the day, it's about prioritisation. I'll pull no punches. The Royal Navy just hasn't got the mass and scale that it had. In 1979, a patrol called the Armilla Patrol was established. I first went out there in 1982 and have been out there on several occasions since, and we had a permanent presence in the region between 1979 and 2024. So, this has come just as our capability has gone. But there is a logic of prioritization there, because there's been a pivot back to the North Atlantic. And I know the Royal Navy has been very busy in the last month or so with Russian incursions, great concerns about our seabed infrastructure, the importance of cables and things like that. But the Royal Navy doesn't have the mass and scale to allow it to do this. So, it's a matter of prioritization going out to do that. But it's also a theatre where some niche capabilities and things that the Royal Navy, many European navies can really help out on, is things like mine warfare and doing surveys to see whether there has actually been mining in the straits out there. So if there was a mine to do it, there are some things that could be leaned into. And, going back to not there with them, I mean, I was a US commander in the Northern Gulf and led the clearance of all mines in the final clearance of mines in the Shattle Arab in the Northern Gulf on behalf of the US when I was the Northern Gulf commander. So, we have operated seamlessly with them for many years.
Given your experience, given your leadership then, back in March, I'd like your take on this. We know the British position, and I would imagine it's probably useful to be in the area, even if you have political differences, just in case, for whatever needs be, occurs. Now, there's reported that the only working attack submarine, HMS Anson, the Astute class, they call it the hunter-killer submarine, that it sailed through kind of the Middle East, around the Arabian Sea, that it sailed past, according to some Navy staff, that they passed the troop build-up onwards to a training exercise in Australia for AUKUS training. Now, it's now said to have headed back towards the Arabian Sea. But I wonder if that was kind of, in terms of messages to allies, was it folly? If you were commanding at the time, would you have said, hang on, is this the right place to be right now, given what's happening elsewhere?
Yeah, my understanding, of course, that was a deployment that had been planned beforehand. I think, unlike the First and Second Gulf Wars, where action that was going to be taken was all done as part of a coalition, it was well signalled. It took months to build up. This one was, very much a US and Israeli action. And, I just go back, we had much more flexibility in the past. And, as an admiral, I'd be advocating, to get on and grow the Navy and sort out the defence investment plan. The defence review that reported last year, I think, was a good defence review, but it was very much focused on, for the Navy, on the North Atlantic. There's war in Europe at the moment, which, it's not on the front pages at the moment, but it still rages in Ukraine. And that is a grand strategic concern for the security of Europe going forward. And I know the Royal Navy's been busy with that. But yeah, I think it's fair to say the Royal Navy is stretched at the moment.
Yeah, just to be in the UK, you kind of need owl-like eyes to be able to rotate in different theatres and different places. And I want to mention news elsewhere this week to get your thoughts on a final thought, Vice Admiral, which is Argentina. Now, in the hypothetical, this is very unlikely. But if Argentina made military manoeuvres again in the Falklands, it must be an assessment that somewhere, some war game, some military Navy staff will be perhaps looking at this issue in light of US floating the idea it's changing its opinion on UK sovereignty of the Falklands. Argentina today calling for a resumption in talks and its claims. Whether you think that there's cause for pause over what could play out and its ability to basically to remake what happened in 1982.
Yeah, well, the trouble is with crises, they tend to come along all at the same time. I mean, the Falklands, I think the Prime Minister has been very clear. It's about self-determination. It's another part of the world that I've spent quite a lot of my life in over the years, especially in the early and mid-'80s, and I know it well. Of course, the difference between 82 and now is that there is a well-found air base down there, a proper airfield, reinforcement can happen. So I think we're a long way away from talking about seeing an analogy with 1982 at the moment. But it all goes on to say the world is a much more unstable place. A lot of the norms and expectations that we had, and certainly the dividend of the end of the Cold War, we're in a very different world nowadays, and one where my view would be we've got to invest to provide the security that we need, and security doesn't start at the English Channel. We're a global trading nation, as we can see around the world. Our security and resilience and way of life is affected by global issues. And, I'm sure the current Secretary of State would say exactly the same things, that we must reflect that.
Yeah, if ever there's a valid case for the Navy, it is right now. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much, Vice Admiral.
Okay, great.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
to speak with you, Gavin.
Duncan
Thank you.
Potts, thank
Bye-bye.
you. UK Navy Warfare Officer from 1979 to 2018.